In this video, we are going to discuss how to play the Grunfeld Defense, and it is one of the best opening that I must recommend you to play against 1d4. So let's check it out. So in the Grunfeld Defense, white starts out the game with 1d4 and black replies with knight to f6. And soon we reach the standard Grunfeld position where black plays d5. White captures the pawn, we have knight into d5, and now we have e4. So white is having a very nice center, and now the pawn on e4 is hitting the knight on d5. We have a knight trade, and now we have bishop to g7. So what is happening in this position is, white is having a very nice center, and black wants to exploit that center by playing c5, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. So this is the idea of black. So after playing bishop to g7, white plays knight to f3. Idea is very simple. White is developing the piece, protecting the pawn on d4, and wants to develop the bishop and castle as soon as possible. So black wants to play c5 in the position, putting more pressure on the pawn on d4. We have bishop to e2, so white is preparing for castle, and now we are going to play knight to c6. So in this position, black is attacking the d4 pawn with the 4 pieces, whereas white is only having 3 pieces to defend the pawn on d4. So white is forced to play bishop to e3, adding one more defender on the pawn on d4. And here black is simply going to play bishop to g4. It is very necessary, guys. You must not castle in the position because it will give white the time to castle as well. Like for example, in this position after playing bishop g4, white cannot push or cannot capture the pawn because there is a very deadly move, bishop into c3, check, and the rook is dead. And if black castles in the position, then white will also get the chance to castle. So that after playing bishop into c3, this idea is not going to work. That is the idea. You should not allow white to castle as long as you can hold this position. So after playing bishop to g4, black idea is to capture the knight on f3, and then the d4 pawn is not protected by the knight. So then black can go for attacking the pawn on d4. For example, after playing bishop to g4, if white tries to castle in the position, we can simply capture the knight, and then we can simply capture the pawn with the bishop, and in the endgame after a couple of exchanges, it's a completely winning position for black. We have knight versus bishop, black is a pawn up, black can simply play e5, and black is completely winning. So castle is already a bad move in the position. So at the place of castle, the necessary move for white is to play e5 in the position. The idea of playing e5 is, now the bishop on g7 can no longer attack the pawn on d4. So after playing e5, we can trade the pawns in the center, and now we can simply castle in the position. White castles, and now we can simply play a very strong move, bishop to e6. And the idea of playing bishop to e6 in the position is, we want to put a bishop to d5, which is a very ideal square for the bishop. And after playing bishop e6, white can go for playing knight to g5, going for the bishop. We can simply play bishop to d5, f4, because there are many players who tries to expand their king side and try to attack on the king side. After playing f4, we can simply play h6, hitting the knight, knight to f3, and now we can simply play e6. And we can say that it's a very solid structure for black, and there won't be any attacks on the king side. And black is simply better in the position because black is having the phenomenal bishop on d5. Black can simply continue the game by playing queen d7, rook d8, and putting more pressure on the pawn on d4. So this could be the ideas. So after playing bishop to g7, if at the place of playing knight to f3, if white tries to play bishop to c4 in the position, I want to add a very important note before I tell you what will happen after bishop to c4. For example, after knight to f3, at the place of playing c5, if black tries to castle in the position, this is a bad position for black, because in this position white can play bishop e2, and white got the extra move to castle in the position because black also castled. So after playing bishop e2, if we simply play c5, attacking on the pawn on d4, but now white can castle in the position because there are 3 attackers and there are 3 defenders. After knight c6, we have bishop e3, And after capture, playing bishop g4, white is already having a very powerful move, d5 in the position. That is the problem, white castle in the position, because now there is no bishop c3 ideas. If we try to capture the rook, queen into a1, bishop into f3, bishop into f3, and after knight f5, we already have a very phenomenal move, bishop to h6, threatening a checkmate on g7 with the queen and the bishop, and also hitting the rook. So playing f6 is already a forced move for black, but now we have bishop to g4. We can be more ruthless at the place of capturing the rook. Rook e8, bishop check, king h8, and now we already have e5. And you cannot capture the pawn, queen into e5 is a game over for black. And even if you try to play knight to c4, attacking the pawn on e5, I can simply play rook u1 and it's already game over for black completely. So this is what can happen if you try to castle in the position at the place of playing c5. You should try to put the king on in the center as long as you can. Yeah, so that after c5, bishop e2, now you are on time to play knight c6, adding one more attacker, and white is forced to play bishop e3, and now you can play bishop g4, attacking the knight, and soon you will reach this position where you are simply better and you can simply continue this position. So after playing bishop to g7, I have discussed knight to f3. So now I'm going to discuss what will happen if white tries to play bishop to c4. If white tries to play bishop to c4 in the position, we can go on and play c5 in the position. Idea is to attack the pawn on d4. Knight e2. And the idea of playing knight to e2 in the position at the place of playing knight to f3 is, now we cannot play bishop g4 because white is already having a very strong move f3 hitting the bishop, and now there is no requirement for white to push the pawn to e5. White can keep the position as like this, so it is a good idea for the white. So after playing knight to e2, black can play castle. We have castle, and now we can play knight to c6, putting more pressure on the pawn on d4. We have bishop e3, so white wants to keep his pawn structure like this because it is already controlling all the light squares, all the center squares. After playing bishop e3, in this position I must recommend you to play b6, which is actually a very nice move. The idea for black is to play bishop to b7. So after playing b6, in this position, white can simply capture the pawn on c5. And white idea is, if black tries to capture the pawn, white can simply capture the pawn on c5 and white is a pawn up. But at the place of capturing the pawn on c5, we are simply going to play queen to c7. And after a pawn sacrifice, or you can say after pawn trade, white is a pawn up. And after playing a into b6, after we are pawn down, but at the exchange of a pawn down, we are having a lots of compensation. After playing a into b6, black idea is already to play knight to e5, putting more pressure on the bishop on c4. The most ideal move for white is to move the bishop to b5, hitting the knight on c6. Black plays knight to e5, and in this position, white is already having very many difficulties to continue the position. After playing knight to e5, the most common move in the position looks like to play knight to d4. Yeah, we are simply centralizing the knight on d4, but it is already a blunder because black is already having a very strong move, knight to g4, and now black is already threatening a checkmate on h2 square. So white is forced to play g3, and now we can simply capture the bishop. And after queen into c3, we are the material is even, and white position is a complete disaster. Yeah, there are many weaknesses on the board, so black can simply win this position. So playing knight to d4 is already wrong idea. Playing bishop f4 is the best move because now the knight cannot move because the queen is attacked. So after playing bishop to f4, there's a very famous game of Jan Nepomniachtchi that I want to discuss with you all guys, so that you will get a very nice understanding of how to play this position or how to continue the position. So after playing bishop to f4, in the Jan Nepomniachtchi game, First of all, this game is from the Moscow Open 2015. So after playing bishop to f4, Ian Nepomniachtchi, first of all those who don't know Ian Nepomniachtchi, he was selected in the World Championship match to fight against Magnus Carlsen, where Magnus Carlsen recently won against him. So after playing bishop to f4, Ian Nepomniachtchi played rook to a3. So Ian Nepomniachtchi is playing with the black pieces. We have queen to c1. White is hitting the rook on a3. We have queen to c5. So now the knight is no longer pinned, and now black idea is already to play knight d3, or you can say knight to c4 ideas. And the queen is also protecting the rook on a3. We have queen to b2, bishop to a6, and bishop to a6 is actually very common move in these setups because the bishop on b5 is already a very strong piece, so it's better to trade the bishops. We have a bishop trade, and now we have bishop into e5 because now the light squares were already very weak, so it's best for white to capture the knight. We have a trade, and now we have rook to b1. So white wants to put the pressure on the pawn on b6, but there are already many weaknesses for white in the position. The e4 pawn is weak, the c3 pawn is weak, as well as the a2 pawn is weak as well. So after playing rook to b1, black simply played rook 8. Now it's a double attack on the pawn on a2. We have g3, so that there would be no longer any back rank issues. But yeah, after playing g3, every white player wants to play f4, but white cannot play it because the pawn is pinned. So after playing g3, black played queen to c6. And in this position, black is hitting the pawn on e4, and white played knight to d4. Yep, giving up the pawn on e4 is the best option because you can't simply protect the pawn on e4. You can't play a move like f3, which just weaks all your dark squares. Black can simply play queen c5 check, and black is already better. That is why white decided to sacrifice a pawn, which was a good idea. Ian Nepomniachtchi captured the pawn. We have rook to e1, queen to d5, knight to c6. So black captured the knight. Now white captured the bishop. And after a couple of moves, we can see black captured the pawn, white captured the pawn. We have a couple of trades in the position, and soon we reach a position where we have the rook endgame. In this position, we have a rook endgame where black is the one who is a pawn up. We saw this position where black was a pawn down, but in this position, black is the one who is a pawn up. So you can say that Grunfeld is a very nice opening to play against 1d4. And as we reach this position in the rook endgame, Ian Nepomniachtchi was able to win this endgame against his opponent, which was rated 2568, and he was rated 2714. So this was the basic idea to show me that playing the Grunfeld is actually a very nice idea. Even a top grandmaster like Ian Nepomniachtchi plays it. So I think I have covered most of the lines in the Grunfeld defense, which are actually very common in the Grunfeld defense. So if you learned anything new in this video, then make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone who want to get a strong opening against 1d4, because there are many players who don't know what to play against 1d4 with the black pieces. So I want to recommend them to try out the Grunfeld defense as well. So if you are new to my channel, then make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep supporting me like this, because I'm going to come up with these interesting content like this. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.